Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Kinsevich, licensed professional counselor and assistant professor of counseling at Evangel University. We are in module 4, and we are in the second video, which we are going to talk about ways to keep supervision records. So hopefully you've already watched the first video in this module talking about the supervisor responsibilities. Here we're going to be really practical about exactly what kind of system would you use to keep supervision notes. So there's 3 ways we're going to talk about. One is just going over types of record keeping systems. And again, I'm going to get really practical and specific on that. I'll show you an example of something that I've done before. And then we're going to talk about what to include in your notes and also how to document supervisee development. So let's talk about types of record keeping systems. You can use an EHR. So if you already use an electronic health record, you could consider keeping your supervision notes inside that same system. So essentially, it's a little bit, I don't know, perfectionists won't like this system probably, but basically you would enter your supervisee as kind of a new client. But obviously you wouldn't put in client type of information. It would just be kind of creating a file for them essentially that's kept in with your client files. And so some EHRs, you can create a custom note. So I know that I have used Theranest before, and they have something called dynamic forms, and you can edit and create forms that you need, and you can even create different types of notes. So you could have your clinical progress note, and then you could, that's just what you use with your clients. And then you could also create kind of a supervisory note. And so based on some of the things we're going to talk about in this video, you could, kind of custom create a note that would be useful for your supervisees. So that's one way to do it, but it is mixed in with your client records. So if that's something that doesn't work for you, then that might not be a great system. A locked file is another way to go, kind of old school. And you could do that in paper, or even if you kept something in a Word document, but that you don't save onto your actual computer hard drive, that it's on a flash drive that you keep locked with, just the same way you would with clinical records. So, usually it's a locked file cabinet or a locked closet within a locked room. So that double locking standard. So you could certainly do it that way. I would be a little bit careful of cloud services and just make sure that you understand the level of encryption and the password protection. And essentially just rule of thumb, if you wouldn't store your client records in that system, then I wouldn't do it with supervisory notes. So treat them the same. Another option, and I'm going to show you one of the things that I've done, is actually keeping notes inside a spreadsheet. So again, you can keep this on a flash drive, an Excel file that you just update, and I'll show you some screenshots in a second. But this is kind of, instead of a traditional paragraph type of note, it actually kind of allows some kind of quick check boxes. You could create a supervisory note in an EHR that also had some check boxes as well. But I kind of created this spreadsheet idea as a way for me to track very specific things. So let me show you that. And again, any of these things you could include in a custom note in an EHR as well. So you see here that basically on the bottom, I have the template page. This is the first tab. And so this always stays blank. That way I can copy it over and over again. I have an instruction page, which I can't show you because of the screenshot. I'm not able to manipulate that. But essentially, I just kind of go through exactly, how, what you would put where. But I'm going to talk you through that. Then you see I have 2 other tabs. It says Supervisee 1, Supervisee 2. So you could create as many tabs as you had supervisees. And then I basically keep one file for the school year if you're working with students. So, or, could be the calendar year, however it makes sense for you. But essentially what I do is I put the date of supervision at the very top of the column. So think of each column as one supervision meeting. And so you can see how I would put the date, let's say in column B right there. And then I would put their hours underneath it. Now, ultimately, it is the student's responsibility to track their hours. So they should not rely on this from you, But I also like to just have a record so that if there's ever any question or doubt, I can go back and I have weekly hours updated. So I put in their direct hours, indirect hours, individual supervision, and group supervision that they've gotten for that week. And then you can see here these developmental tasks. I would encourage you to read more about this. I'm not sure that we're going to have a module on this. We might, but you can look up Longville and colleagues. They did some research around professional development of counselors and some developmental tasks that they are basically in the midst of working through and accomplishing as they grow professionally. So you can see here competence, emotional awareness, autonomy, professional identity, respect for individual differences, purpose and direction, personal motivation, professional ethics, and then I added faith integration because I have supervised students who are working from a faith background, and part of their learning is how to do that in an ethical way. So I included that. And so essentially, I'm just going down the line here and putting an X by all of the things that I either noted that week or that we talked about. But essentially, what am I seeing in terms of developmental tasks that they're actually working through? So then going down, this is kind of a whole thing that goes down. I also have check marks for supervisor roles. And Bernard and Goodyear talk about these roles of the counselor, the teacher, and the consultant, and how clinical supervisors kind of wear these three hats, sometimes all at once in a meeting. Sometimes you kind of lean more towards one than another. But I just kind of document, what hats I was wearing in that session. And then you can see where I have techniques used. And so I have IPR, which you hopefully watched in Module 3, role play, self-disclosure, giving feedback, formal evaluation, brainstorming, supportive listening, clinical skills training, and then I have a couple of spots for other. And so essentially, I'm just putting X's by all the things that I did that day. And then I'm going to switch to the next screen so we can see I put topics discussed. And so these are topics that I want to make sure I'm covering with my supervisees. And so again, I'm just putting an X by all the things that we talked about that day. So multicultural issues, professional development, professional standards, record keeping, crisis intervention, the role of the counselor, case conceptualization and diagnosing, treatment goals and planning. Again, I added the faith integration component, and then specific clinical strategies and other boxes. So I can fill those in. So essentially, what am I talking about with my supervisee in the supervision session? And then down at the bottom, I have room for client issues. And so I can write a paragraph in there. I only use client initials, so there's no confidential information stored in here, which makes it a little bit easier when you're talking about, locking records and things like that if you aren't putting confidential information in here. Although in and of itself, the supervisor, is also confidential. But I am careful not to put client names in here. So I just put initials. And if there's something, specific with a client, then I fill that in there. Then I have a little spot for assignments and to do. So kind of what do they need to follow up on? What do I need to follow up on? And then I also, at the start of the semester, put their goals so that I can always look and see what their goals are so that I can keep those in mind. So that's kind of each column. Every single time we meet, it's a new column. I'm putting the date, and I'm just mostly putting X's all the way down through that, and maybe some specific words around the client information. So then I'm going to pretend that you're scrolling all the way to the right side of the spreadsheet, where you've got all these columns and you've met with them how many ever times. And then I have plugged into my spreadsheet essentially a calculation. And so if you know how to create an equation and a calculation, a formula basically in a spreadsheet, then you can do this as well. And it's a summary column. And the total hours will get calculated. So all the hours that I've kept track of, I'll be able to see the totals, which is helpful for me as a supervisor to see where we're at and how many hours they've done. And then that should also match what they have and what you're signing off on for them for the semester. And then you'll see that all these zeros here, every time I put an X in a box, it adds it up for me. So I can go down the line midway through the supervision, at the end of the supervision. I can check this anytime. I can see the developmental tasks that have gotten, a lot of X's, some that have gotten no X's. So this is a really cool way to track the supervisee development, because I can see how frequently I'm observing their developmental progress. And then going down, I don't have additional screenshots of this, but same thing, it will summarize also, the topics that we covered. So I can look down and say, oh, wow, we haven't ever talked about this, topic that I really want to make sure I cover with every supervisee. Let me make sure I bring that up maybe in a coming up session. So it's just a kind of cool way to really see exactly what you're covering, and kind of in a cumulative fashion. So I'm more than happy to share that. If you think that's a great system, I can share my master template with you. And also there are other ways as well. I know that Evangel, we're going to be using Supervision Assist. And so everything can be kind of stored and uploaded in there as well. And so that may create other pathways for note taking. I'm not as familiar with that yet, but I will be. All right, so let's talk about what to include in a supervisory note. Hours tracking, I think, is important. Again, the student is ultimately responsible for that, but I like to know that my numbers match their numbers, or at least pretty close. So when I'm signing off on this, I can verify that, yes, this is what we've reported week to week. Also, writing up any client progress if there are safety concerns. We're going to talk in the next video about how to document in a client crisis, which is a little bit different. But again, I only use initials. I don't use client names. But I do like to see that I'm kind of tracking with clients, and that there is documentation that I'm checking on, specific things, and following up on things that they share with me, that kind of thing. And then, of course, those interventions. What exactly are you doing in supervision? What types of interventions are you using? Of course, my spreadsheet system, I have those all listed out, and so I can just choose from them, or I can put something else in the other column if I need to. If you were writing up more of like a paragraph note, then you would want to include all of these things. Or if you were creating a specific supervisory type of note in your EHR, then you could kind of set it up with some of these elements as well. So in terms of tracking supervisee development, no matter which of these systems you use, I do think it's important for you to document formative as well as summative evaluations. And so we will talk about that in another module, in module 6. But, there should be evidence that you've given them kind of feedback along the way, and also a copy of any summative evaluations that you do. I also, as you could see from the spreadsheet, really pay attention to the developmental tasks of the supervisee. And so it is important to document in some kind of way what growth or development you see in them. Longbill, like I said, would be a great person to look up to see what those things are, but you can go back to the spreadsheet to see that list as well. And then obviously we want to, just like with our clients, show evidence of growth and progress on goals. So, whatever goals they established with you at the beginning of the supervisory relationship, you want some kind of tracking mechanism for, how did they accomplish those goals? What growth have you seen in them? And this is also, when you've documented this, really helpful for when you're going about giving like a letter of recommendation or things like that. It gives you a lot of specifics. That's, again, where the spreadsheet system, for me, I can glance at one thing and I can see kind of the year at a glance. And so that's really handy. Other systems, you kind of have to look note by note, and it doesn't necessarily summarize it for you. So again, pros and cons, but those are just some of the things to keep in mind when you're actually figuring out your system for how you're going to document in supervision. I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for watching.